Welcome to the first in a series of video interviews of my mum. This first one, she's talking about her parents, my grandparents, and at the end of it, I've scanned all the photographs that she'd collected over the years. So I hope you find it useful, and if you've got any more photos or info, please let me know. Thank you.
Mum, can you tell me please about your father's parents?
My father's parents were hill sheep farmers. They had been for generations, long before the coal came through the valleys. My father's father went to a small farm. They all started in a small hill farm and went to a bigger one as they married and got some money together and were able to farm a bigger farm. My father's father was such a hill sheep farmer, and he was a member of the Welsh family, the Evans family. They were deemed to be very intelligent, and some of them went to Swansea Grammar School to be educated. My father's father was articled to a man called Jonathan Rees. Jonathan Rees was in charge of all the horses in the big, deep navigation mine in Cairo. A very responsible job. And he took my father on as an apprentice at the age of 12. So my father's formal education stopped when he was 12.
How many brothers and sisters did he have?
Well, I could tell you from the photographs, but he had in particular a daughter, Annie, who was a great support to all the others. And then there was Johnny and Willie, and they were about 5 or 6 children. I can refer back to the family tree and give you the details there. My father volunteered for the Boer War.
Let's start to talk a bit more about, where did your father go to school?
He went to school in Neath. Of course, his childhood was shattered because his father had this wasting degree of the leg, and as I've told you, he walked over the mountain to Neath, to the local doctor, the one and only doctor in the area, and he advised my father to have his leg amputated. And my father replied there was no way he could do that. He had a young family and no other means of support. Well, anyway, he died. Why his leg became useless, I don't know, but he died of it. So the other children, as was the custom, were palmed out onto brothers and sisters.
So where did your father go?
So my father stayed in Blanchinby Farm. But Uncle Jack and Willie, they were found out to brothers and sisters.
Who looked after your father?
My father left school at 12.
Who looked after your father after his father died?
Well, he went to Blanchinby Farm. That was the homestead. It had the run of the mountain. It was a very big sheep farm. And my uncle John Maddock, who left me the family sword, by the way, he, in fact, John Maddock was the hero. He never married. He stayed bachelor and helped his sister to bring up the children.
I'm interested in your father. So your father went to school from the age 4 to 12, did he?
My father was, wait a moment, John. My father left school at 12.
Yes, but where did he go to school, first of all?
He had to pay to go to school.
Right.
And he, I think, went to school I'm not sure if it was Cairo or Neath, I'm not sure when they moved. But when his father died, their life was shattered. The family was broken up and distributed to various uncles and aunts.
Okay. Was your father bright at school?
My father was very bright, and Auntie Annie was very bright.
What about your grandmother? What do you know about your grandmother?
My father's mother, oh, she had a terrible life. She had all these children that I've told you about, and then she was silly enough to remarry a drunkard, really. There's nothing better than that, who tried to get us her money, the old story, and they were very poor. So Uncle Jack, first of all, emigrated to South Africa because he had free passage during the Boer War. So took advantage of that.
But tell me more about your grandmother. Where does she come from?
My grandmother, she was born in Llangefni, and she was a sister to my other grandmother. The two grandmothers were sisters.
Right. Do you remember her?
I remember her. She became blind. And I remember her for her saying, "Is it a sunny day today?" She had cataracts, which are now common and curable. And she'd ask me this pathetic question over and over again. I was small. Is the sun shining?
Okay, and do you remember your grandfather?
No.
He died before you, did he? You were born?
He died. He had the leg with the trouble in it.
Yes. Okay, let's stop there. So what happened to your father when he left school at 12?
He was apprenticed because he knew him to the local blacksmith. The local blacksmith, of course, worked with horses, and this is before the mines were mechanised. And
so he was apprenticed to the local blacksmith.
He was apprenticed to Jonathan Rees by name.
Yeah, and did he look after?
A gentleman who was kind to my father and encouraged him. And Uncle Jack was the oldest boy, and he first of all emigrated to South Africa.
Yes, but I want to know what happened to your father once he was an apprentice. Did he go down the mines? Did he?
No.
What did he do?
He worked on the surface, so he didn't get syllables.
Okay, so what did he do?
Underground, he looked after the horses.
Right.
It was it was a very important job.
And how many years did he do that for?
He did that until he was 18.
And how many horses are you talking about?
I don't know.
Are these pit ponies that went down the mine?
Yes.
Yes. So what happened at 18 then?
What happened to
What did he decide to do at 18?
At 18, his brother Jack had gone to South Africa to find his fortune and to join in the Boer War. So Jack, the older brother, having gone to South Africa, my father decided to go. So he decided to volunteer for the British Army, and he was posted out to South Africa.
Do you know where?
And I've got photographs.
Yes, but do you know where?
To South Africa.
Yeah, whereabouts in South Africa?
Transvaal, I think it was.
Okay, and how long was he in the Boer War for?
Well, the Boer War was until 1901, I think. So he went out at the age of 18 and was there until 1901 when the war...
What do you know about what he did in the war?
Well, I've got photographs.
Yes, I know you've got photographs.
What did he do in the Boer War? Well, he was just an ordinary foot soldier.
Do you know if he was in any battles?
No.
You don't?
But one thing he used to say was there was a man called Sir Abe Bailey, and he found the Hope Diamond, and my father had been in that area. He might well, he always used to say, have picked up that diamond. They hope it's the biggest diamond that they've ever found.
So he was in the Boer War for 2 or 3 years, and then what did he do?
Well, then after the Boer War, he decided to try and earn a living, and in South Africa, and he knew quite a lot about underground water, because as a miner they were always very conscious of floods and flooding a mine, so he had a lot of expertise. So he decided to join the irrigation department of the South African government, and he freelanced and was one of the first white men in very many areas. This is about 1900, 1905, and his job was to look for water. They would find the gold, but it was no use unless they had a water supply.
And did he make his fortune?
Well, it depends what you call a fortune. When he came back home from South Africa in 1922, he collected £9,000, which in those days you could live comfortably, which he did on his capital.
It's probably £900,000.
Pardon?
It's probably £900,000.
Oh, yes. And
why did he come home?
why did he come home?
Yes.
He came home on leave. He'd had 3 lots of malaria, and he'd been in very highly infected areas, or in areas that were ripe for malaria, and he'd had 3 or 4 bad bouts of malaria, so he came home on sick leave.
Was he intending to go back?
Wait a moment, no, wait a minute.
He came home on sick.
He came home on sick leave, and we had an Uncle John Maddock, the one who gave you the sword, and he took my father down to Bridgend, to the railway station. And having gone to Bridgend, he joined the train in Garth Station, and on the train was my mother.
Woohoo!
And she apparently hadn't been she wasn't very strong ever, but she, in her words, something told her to go on the train. So her mother told her, "Well, why don't you go to Bridgend for a little turn?" So she went, and Uncle John Maddock was in the same carriage, and he introduced my father to my mother.
Love at first sight? Was it love at first sight?
I think it was, yes. Because my mother had a boyfriend of 7 years standing,
That's no good.
Dickton Wine, who really, he couldn't get married because his mother was still alive, and it was still that sort of
So
society.
how long after meeting before they got married? What?
They got married within the year. And the night before they were married, Dickton Wine, my mother's old boyfriend, was pacing up and down outside Gether Lane, trying to get her to change her mind.
Poor boy.
I know. So they went on honeymoon to Torquay.
Very nice.
And very soon afterwards, they were expecting a baby.
So, Mum, they got married pretty quickly, and then did they then have a family?
Yes, they had a full pregnancy, and a baby boy was born, but it died at birth.
That must have been terrible.
It was terrible, and after that my mother had 3 girls. And anyway.
So tell us about life. Where did you live? Where were you born?
Well, my father had got this well over £9,000, which was a great deal of money, so he retired, as it were.
Yeah.
And where did he go to live? But in the farm, and we moved to Gadlis factory.
So did he buy Gadlis
The woolen mill had closed down just the year before. No more demand from the miners for Welsh flannel, which was very good because it absorbed perspiration.
Is that why it was called factory?
Yes, Gadlis
So
factory.
he bought it and converted it into a house?
My father bought it, and it had land with it, 2 acres of land. And my father put in a dynamo and a generator.
And the watermill?
And we made our own electricity.
First in the valley?
First in the valley, yes.
Next up are all the photographs of my grandfather's side of the family that my mother collected. I've scanned them, I've enhanced them, and I've tried to put them in some sort of order to make sense. So let me know if you've got any more information that can add to this. Here's a simplified version of the family tree my mother put together. You'll notice a number of things. First of all, the names of the farms are all down, because they're all from a small geographical area and a very tight-knit community. Secondly, you'll see that there are sisters and twins and all sorts of things going on there. It wasn't a big pool of people. And then finally, lots of similar names, whether it's Willies and Thomases, Gwencleans and Annies. Quite tricky to make a sense of who's who. Here's a print of Blanclinry Farm where my grandfather was brought up. I don't think very much had changed since Roman times. The harvest was still brought in by horse and cart. You'll see various brothers there, and also John Maddock, the hero uncle who looked after my grandfather when his father died. So coal had been discovered in the valleys, and here's a picture of the Kyra colliery where my grandfather worked, and also some pit ponies. Here's the first photograph we have of my grandfather, a fine looking man, and young I think, probably before he went out to the Boer War. He had 3 years in the Boer War and then decided to become a mining engineer looking after water, and here's a picture of his equipment, and we think this photograph was taken during the 1917 war. Also in 1917 is this group photograph of Gwenclean, my great-grandmother, and 3 of her children, Annie, Willie, and I think Jenny. And here's a close-up of my great-grandmother. Moving on to my grandfather's siblings, here's Auntie Annie, who looked after the whole family. And in this photograph in the front, we have 2 of the brothers, Christopher and William. Christopher again here, and Jack, who must have come back from South Africa by about this time. And here we have a nice group shot with all the wives. My grandfather must still have been out in South Africa. Next up, we have a couple of photographs of Uncle Willie. He's here at top left. I think this looks like he's getting married in the middle here. This is the last photograph. We think he died in 1933, gold dust on the lungs. My grandfather came home in 1921 to become a gentleman farmer. Here he is with Sam, who married Bessie, the twin of Annie. And by this time, things had changed a lot. Mechanisation had taken place. Final photograph, my grandfather died in the cold winter of '63. My grandmother Annie was born on Welsh Farm, a twin of Bessie, and here's a shot of her father, Benjamin Evans, taken in about 1900. If we skip to 1917, here's the wedding of Kate and Morgan, Nana's brother, and she's a bridesmaid. There she is, peeking out from underneath her hat. And what you'll notice is there's a hand on her shoulder, and we think that might be Gwenclean, her mother, my great-grandmother, so that's nice to see her. Here she is 3 decades later, and finally as an old lady. So my Nana had 3 brothers serving in the Great War, Willie, who I think died, Morgan, who got shot, and this is Glyn, who wasn't just a soldier, he was a theologian, a scholar, and he became head of all the free churches in the whole of Britain, which is a remarkable thing to have achieved. Here we have David and Thomas, the twins of Gettelinor, born in about 1884. Back to my Nana, and here's a shot of her when she was about 20 years old, taken in the studio. My mum said she hated having a photograph taken and destroyed most of the photos, and you can see that here. But there are just 1 or 2. Here's a little tiny photograph, and from that we get this beautiful portrait of her, which I think does her full justice. So there are very few photographs of my grandmother. This one was taken in 1936 with Gwen Scare in the middle. You can see she's not looking at all happy, but of course everybody's happy with Auntie Nancy. There they are looking nice together. This one taken at Gadlis, and it wasn't long before grandchildren came along. Here's a nice shot of her with Janet and Eleanor, And of course, 3 lovely daughters, Celia, Gwen and Mary. Here are the girls, the aunties, Bessie, Lettuce and Annie, so that's very nice to see. A few typical poses, reading the newspaper and shelling peas. And then the last photograph was taken with me that I have. She spent her final years with Auntie Mary in Aberystwyth. I could find just a few photographs of them together. Here they are in 1922, a year after they got married. Unfortunately, they lost their first child, boy, but pretty soon afterwards, 3 lovely girls came along. And here's nice family shots, and as families are prone to do, they all kind of grew up. So here's a photograph after the war, and then of course weddings came along. This is Auntie Mary's wedding, and my final photograph of the 2 of them together. I think they look mighty fine. My parents used to drive us up to Gadlis to stay, and this looks like a nice shot of Sunday lunch. Finally, this is all the photos that I have. If any relatives have any more, I'd be pathetically grateful to receive them and any more additional information. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you and goodbye.